I'm Lee Bristow, host of Saros Insights and Director of Cyber and AI Governance. At Saros, we partner with the world's most recognized brands to make the complex simple. My aim is to deconstruct the strategies of Ireland's top business leaders, from AI governance, digital transformation, and some that are even scaling through acquisition. We're playing a bigger game, uncovering the human stories behind the technology. Welcome to our show. Today, we're interviewing Gareth Walsh, a co-founder of Paypercut and a fintech board advisor. He has helped build and scale category-leading payments and financial infrastructure businesses across multiple markets. He pairs hands-on technology leadership with deep expertise in regulation, AML, and financial crime. Gareth, thank you very much for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Very happy to be here. Yeah, it's great. Got a bit drenched on the way in, but that's okay. I hope that's not the way it's going to go. You've got all the bad luck out of the way.
All of it's out of the way, and hopefully it's just spring and sunshine going forward, especially for the next 30 minutes.
Excellent. Yeah.
So let's dive into it. You have had a really interesting career. You've been in startups, you've been in billion-euro evaluation organizations, but the most important piece is that you have had the kind of journey that most IT leaders actually just read about. Right? You've been in the startups through scale up and then into that future growth technology in the fintech space and taking it from startup into that million-euro evaluation or billion-euro evaluation. What were the kind of biggest challenges from a technology, people, process in terms of that scale from startup all the way up to that billion-euro evaluation organization?
Yeah, the challenges at each level of scale are radically different. So, there's so many ways I can tackle that question. So maybe at the start, you do a fundraise and you do maybe 2-ish million euros and you can't do very much at least I'm in fintech for that amount of money. So the start is a bit like Frankenstein together a very substandard product and prove that you can sell and that there's a place to go. And so that in itself is a challenge. So you have to take services from different people and try to cobble it together. And then if you can manage to get past that point, then the next point is really about tuning the margin, stabilizing the system, closing the feature gap so you can raise a bit more. And so that's a challenge in itself. And then you need to get to a point where you have an economic model that you can scale. So when you get your business to a point that you can scale, you then need to do a growth round. You go from venture to growth. And so you need to build a business that you can put money in one side, you have very tight unit economics, so 12 to 24 months later, it's into profit and that's investable. And then beyond that, you go into your A and B and C series rounds. So that's like how do you put a business together and how do you start it? Then the people side, like people are radically different at the different stages. So initially you kind of get your band of brothers together and you know everybody, you know everybody's name, you know their partner, you know their kids, you know their dogs, everybody knows everybody. So everybody is pointed in the same direction. That's very easy to manage. And then you kind of hit a point of maybe say 50-ish people, and then you need to functionalize. So then you start off and you have your engineering and your product and your go-to-market sales, marketing, finance, and all of that type of thing. And you can do that for kind of so long. And then you'll hit a point where you get to maybe 100 or 150 people where the business will naturally split. And this is a point where I see a lot of people trip up. So at that point, you can either get ahead of it and do your split. So in sum up, we tribalized. So basically we created cross-functional teams that were almost independent, like a little business. So they could conceive and develop and deploy independently. And then you build a leadership core around that keeps them on track, but they need to be as independent as possible. So every time you add 100 or so people, you add another tribe or a group of people, cross-functional team built around the value stream, and you can keep doing that. And then the evolution is evolving how you do your leadership from maybe a tight group, and then maybe expand that to the more senior managers, maybe 30 or so, and then onto the whole leadership, and you cascade down what you're trying to achieve. That's the point that I see most people fail. So a lot of founders who do very well get to a certain point and they find it very hard to step out of the business, and then they become a bottleneck. And then beyond that, when you start getting into thousands of staff, then you really need to have an eye on how the outside world perceives you. So you need to then start thinking about entities and entity structure and how does all of this go together, and how do you line things up for, to look credible for proper investment like private equity, or maybe even heading towards an IPO. So you can trip on all of those places. And I think that the skill is trying to kind of get ahead of it. Then on the technology side, you asked as well, that's again completely different. So in a startup, it's very important you hit milestones. So I always say to the team, this is like, I'm showing my age maybe a little here now. There's an arcade game called Ridge Racer. It's a racing game, you're driving. So your aim is to get to the next checkpoint. So you have 60 seconds of driving and you have to hit that checkpoint. And if you don't hit the checkpoint, the whole game is over. So a lot of engineers want to build the perfect product. They want to spend an awful lot of time in discovery and writing business requirement documents and getting everything perfect so that they don't develop technical debt later on.
Yeah.
That's not good for a startup. So in a startup, you need to iterate. You just need to go, hit the checkpoint, get the next funding round in, and then you can iterate and be nimble. So another thing that you'll see is that most people are very efficient in a particular point of scale, and not many people have the flex to be able to operate in all of them. So you might need to change the people out as well as you go along, and that's very difficult because in startups everybody hires head of, and then inevitably maybe 5 years later the organization is 10 times bigger and you need a completely different head of at that point. So then you're going to lose the people who helped you build it. So this is one of the challenges. There's many challenges to lead.
Kind of staying on that theme on the technology side, was there in that scale up, and we're talking about SumUp specifically maybe, or you can pull on from any other business that you've been involved in. From a technology perspective, looking at a platform, buy versus build, re-architecture at any one of those stages, was there a kind of a technology decision or a moment where you invested in technology that created kind of a 10x in terms of value creation or growth on the back of any one of those stages or businesses?
Yeah, there's lots of different places where that can happen. And again, you really need to pitch to the stage that you're at. In some places, you have a lot of maybe some really talented engineers who just get out and they just code and they're just solving a problem without really enough planning into what the architecture looks like.
Yeah.
And as you build a bigger and bigger stack and you're adding components, if you don't set it up right, you're going to have to QC everything when you make a change here. So we used to call this the platform of platforms. You need a good central core and then kind of build off of that. I'm no engineer, but I've been attached to this in an ancillary way. And I was involved in some acquisitions where we bought businesses where the main value was supposedly the platform. And then when we got into it, actually it was going to sink. So I've seen that happen as well. But in terms of transformation, I think finding the right partner is super important, and somebody who's really well able to service your business where you're at. I was talking to Barry on the way in, who works with you guys, and we were just talking about how good it is to have a boutique type of a service. The bigger enterprise, they can deal with things in a different way. But if you're a smaller or a hyper growth business, you really want a lot of bang for your buck. And the only way for that to work is to work with somebody who is not just putting a template on you, who's really getting into your business and really understanding what you're trying to achieve and kind of help you out. And then your own engineering and product team can work on what they need to work on, while whatever the project is you need to engage your partner with. They can really understand what you're trying to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's take it all the way up to the board level now, just in terms of, you've spent a lot of time on the startup side of things, but as it's scaled, you moved into board roles. You do a lot of advisory into board organizations. When we're thinking about technology, strategy, and board, how do boards actually provide the oversight and governance without actually overstepping into the decisions, so that the decisions are left with the executives? What's the right kind of mix there?
So I think the important thing is to define what kind of board we're discussing, right? So if you're talking about a regulated financial services institution,
Yeah.
so in that case, you're going to have your executive board and you'll have some non-executive directors. I act as a non-executive director for a few firms,
Yep.
and that's a regulatory mandated role. And those boards, to put it bluntly, are mostly regulatory focused boards, and they don't get enough attention really on the technology side. Generally beyond maybe DORA. Okay, so it's much more around control functions and making sure they meet it. And you could contrast that with a board where you maybe have a hold company that's controlling the business where the actual strategy is happening.
Yeah.
And I've also sat on those type of boards, and they're really radically different. So those type of boards are ones where you have investors, usually with deep industry knowledge and maybe a very wide portfolio, and they're giving suggestions, helping steer the business, kicking open doors. It's a completely different game. So I think that the regulatory type of board in a financial service institution, and then the type of board that's running, like advising from an investor perspective, is different. And then I would imagine outside of regulated financial services, it's different again. Most executives just want to get on and run the business, and they don't want to be, they keep the board happy and then move on. So the executive team is really running it. The role of a director is to direct. So you should be giving high level direction, not getting involved in how it's executed. You should be more saying, this is what we want to achieve in this time frame, and then maybe dealing with some problems. And unfortunately, technology leads to problems. There's lots of things happening in the industry right now which are magnifying some of those problems. We'll probably talk about in a minute.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's so many angles to what you just asked. Is there anything you want to double click on?
Yeah, so I think the one I do like the regulatory piece, because I think, just coming in terms of your background from the fintech perspective, I think the piece that I'm particularly interested in is the fintech piece, because when you consider the opportunity there, so you often you mentioned that it was from a regulatory perspective, the board is actually really kind of concerned about it, so they're very focused on that. From a fintech and a startup perspective, using that regulation as a technology moat almost to be able to actually protect. Is there an opportunity essentially for those regulator type boards to actually take a bit more of an interest? Now DORA is driving that, but yeah, I think my question is how could they get a little bit more educated around it? And then secondly, to be able to govern it more effectively.
Yeah, so governance is two things. It's firstly knowing what's happening in the business, and secondly making decisions. So you're dead right. You need to understand what's going on, and you need to be conversant at least with what's happening in industry and how things are. The best way to approach that is to look at your board composition, and most boards that I'm involved in do this pretty well, and the regulators have an eye to that. So you want to find a balance of skills. Often I find in financial services there is a lack of technical talent, a technical skill base on the board. And often I find as well there's a lack of business strategy, just business people. Generally, the type of non-executive directors you would see are maybe ex-bankers, or they're consultants. They're not necessarily operators. So those are two things I think we could do better. And I think that the regulator could certainly encourage that. And I think that there's two types of financial services and fintech that you see in Ireland, okay, that come to Ireland. Because Ireland is a great place for this. So the first is a real startup. I'm running one now. So we were just talking before. I've just closed a seed round, so a second round of €5 million, which is great. And a lot of that is to drive, thank you, a lot of that is to drive a license application here and open an office and all of that kind of stuff. So this is one type of business, right? And this type of business is one where we're engineering and product led. A lot of people are building rails, but not on and off ramps. So they're not really building products. It's, and a lot of engineers who are so talented are so technical, but they're not thinking from a customer perspective. And I think that's one gap. So normally in that type of place, the founders who are actually doing the strategy are on the board, and they're very involved, and you get very good conversation from that. That's been my experience. When you go to the much bigger entities, so this is the likes of a global entity with a massive $1 billion business who wants to tackle business in Europe and uses Ireland as a regulatory hub.
Yep.
And what they do is they basically, generally, they will hire just the control functions with no business people, and they're really just ticking a box. And I don't think that that's good really for anybody. And I think it's missing a kind of a trick. So in those type of boards, the strategy and the technical strategy and all of that strategy, it happens abroad. And then, from a CBI perspective, so the Central Bank of Ireland, they're interested in decisions being made on the soil here. So substance, decisions have to be made here. So then what that becomes is the governance becomes the outsourcing relationship to the parent or the group entity, and really asking good questions and tackling that, and making sure you get quality reporting from the group entity. So they're two different types of businesses.
Yeah. One of the things that you mentioned there was in your own business, your engineers typically want to build guardrails versus actual solutions, right? I really love that line. I think I would really like to kind of go into a little bit more detail on that, especially in terms of how your team is actually building out your products and platforms, leveraging on AI. What has been the biggest difference for you coming into this new business, starting out and redesigning?
Sure. So my business is building products, not building rails, and that's because we see how things are kind of happening. So I think that there's probably a few ways to tackle that question. There's a lot of things happening now. AI is just one of them. A digital euro would be something else that's happening, and people don't really understand it. This is a good example of rails. So there's going to be a way to do commerce, but nobody really knows how to engage. They know it's going to be some kind of central bank digital currency or some kind of crypto, but what does it likely look like?
Practically speaking, are you actually getting value out of the use of AI in your development?
Okay, so AI is a different question. So most people are using AI, maybe not your clients, I guess. Most people that I come across are using AI just like a consultant, and I certainly do that. I probably have 2 to 3 hours of conversations with AI a day, and it's certainly getting smarter. You need to be very careful and make sure that your environment is locked down, or else you can be exposed. I'm working with a really amazing company that I'd like to shout out called Anka. So we share a couple of investors with them. So they are building for me an AML orchestration platform,
Okay.
and they are 5.5 engineers, and they're all very talented engineers, but they vibe code their whole product. So they spend all of their time on strategy and on prompting, and they have built something in a very short period of time, probably maybe a tenth of the time that our team would have built it. And it's a better product because it's what they do. It's what they kind of, what they concentrate on. So there's super things can happen. It's a force multiplier, but there's probably one thing that we should touch on, which is the regulatory attitude to that. So I'm in the middle of a license application with the Central Bank of Ireland. And so Central Bank of Ireland want to show that you have substance here and that the control frameworks, everything is here. And one of the benefits of AI, it's a force multiplier. So it means you don't need as many resources. The regulators are not happy about that. They still want to see the people making the decisions and all of the guardrails that go with that. So they're lagging, and things are moving at such a pace. I'm a bit worried about where it may go, because I think that there's certainly a gap in the understanding and in how they're approaching these things.
So we'll come back to the regulator piece. I think the AML component, I think, is really interesting.
Sure.
So just in terms of AML and financial crime from a European perspective, yeah, using AI to essentially build out a product around, or an orchestration layer around AML, right? So the question is how is AI changing it for non-criminals and criminals, for a lack of a better word, just in terms of creating platform tools to potentially either exploit individuals or organizations from a European context?
Yeah, this is a massive risk. Like, it's huge. Okay, so this is one of the reasons why, as a firm, you need to adopt AI, because you need to fight fire with fire. So this is a very important point. I think it's very important. I think if you just take a step back and you look at how do you mitigate the chance of crime being perpetrated on your system, there are 2 mitigating strategies. So mitigating strategy number 1, know your customer, KYC, collect all the IDs and to be honest, it's useless, because really anyone with half a brain can get around it. And with AI tools now, it's even easier. The other side of it, however, is ongoing monitoring, and AI is perfect for that. So it's like looking at the transactions, picking out the patterns and predicting where they go. When you look at the legislation, all of the legislation, virtually all of the legislation, is aimed at KYC. And that's the least effective way to really stockpiling the system. So I think where we should lean is on the monitoring. And I think that AI lends itself to that incredibly well, really incredibly well.
What do you mean by monitoring?
So imagine all of the traffic that's going through. If you're in the payments industry, there's going to be billions going through your accounts. So the best way to catch a fraudster is not to get their ID and see who they are. They can fake that, or they can just give their real stuff and get through. But if you see, I don't know, let's say a butcher who happens to be transacting at 4 a.m. regularly, there's probably something up. And, you know, in the past, we would have used rules-based systems to find that. And that's a very simple example. But fraudsters are getting much, much more sophisticated. But what the AI can do is take very, very large data sets and pull very good context out, and either raise a flag. And when we become comfortable that the flags that are being raised are right, well, then you can actually take action in real time. And I think that's really, really important, because in payments, they're getting faster, instantaneous. And that's hard on the fraud side. And, you know, fraud is a really big problem. So I can tell you the latest figures on the MasterCard system. So on the MasterCard system, so card, this is in Europe, card present payments, 15 basis points. So 15% of 1% is fraud. And card not present is 35 basis points. So that's really significant. And when you're a business that's processing payments in the billions, that starts to really look like something. And then, of course, the regulators have an eye on things. You know, you need to reduce that on your system. You have the regulator who may fine you. You also have the financial damage you take on yourself. And then if you're in the card world, you have Visa, MasterCard who can also fine you. And it's the right thing to do, right? You want a clean system as well. It's very important to leverage those type of tools. And if fraudsters have them, and they do, you have no hope as a person trying to review transactions or even build a kind of a legacy rules-based platform. You really need to be ahead of the curve. And then also the impact even on encryption. That's very worrying where that can go. So in the card space, you know, PCI DSS is the security standard.
Yeah.
Effectively, your numbers are all hashed. You can't see anything. Even me as a processing firm, I can't see the numbers. But now with AI, like, it's getting more and more possible to crack these, and that's very frightening. That's the basis on which the card system is working. And so, you know, in Paypercut, we have a contention that card payments are going to disappear in the future, and other alternate payment methods are going to take over. And so they're going to have different challenges that will present. And I think this is where the regulators have to be careful, because things are moving so quickly. They have to keep up with it. And firms want to also keep up with it, because fraudsters are going to be ahead of the game, right?
Yeah.
So there's an awful lot happening in this space right now, a huge amount.
I think we're going to leave it there. Gareth, thank you so much for joining us today.
Pleasure.
Really appreciate
Thank
your
you.
insights.
Thank you so much. Cheers.